Hi everyone, welcome to our Retail Under Attack webinar. I'm really glad that you can make some time to join us today. My name is James Fleming. I am part of the Customer Account Executive team here in HackerOne. I've been in HackerOne for just over a year and I manage some of our commercial sized customers in EMEA. So today we're joined by an amazing customer speaker in Finn Fabry from On Running, who's going to join us today. The format for today's webinar is a quick discussion with Finn about working with HackerOne and the cybersecurity strategy that they have in place at On Running. And then we'll turn it over to you, the listeners and participants, to ask any questions that you may have. So we have a Q&A panel down the bottom. I encourage you to please pop your questions into the Q&A section. And then at the end of the discussion, we'll go through them all and look at answering as many as possible before the hour is up. So Finn, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Good stuff. Great. Thank you for joining us. And Finn, would you mind kicking us off with a quick introduction to you and what you do at On, if that's okay?
Absolutely. First off, thank you for having me here. Glad to join you. I have started my security career actually in 2019 as a pen tester, as probably quite some people in this sector. And then went from pen tester / consultant to an in-house pen tester for a company for a while. And then 2 years ago, I joined On. So gradually progressing more to the blue team side, and now I'm fully on the blue team page, hiring the pen testers and trying to make On more secure. My current focus is on building more monitoring capabilities and handling application checks for all the new things that we want to include in our tech landscape. Yes, and I'm also on our side responsible for the HackerOne bug bounty program.
Fantastic. So you've worn many hats so far, even though it's only been a relatively short career, but in cybersecurity anyway. But you've been at On for nearly 2 years now, or just over 2 years. And over those years, how have you kind of seen the threats that you're seeing day to day evolve since that period has started?
So, I mean, as you said, it's 2 years, it's not forever. But I feel like there are some things that I should point out first that did not evolve because they're just apparently here to stay. And I already knew that these threats before joining On. So credential-based attacks are an evergreen. I think they're just not going away because people still use recycled passwords or easy passwords. And then things on the more fluctuating side is like what I would call flukes, where you have specific vulnerabilities, specific things that came up just now, where you just have to stay on top of the game to even know about it. I think Log4j caught us all a little off guard, but these things, or the regression thing, the recent OpenSSH vulnerability, where you have to cut through all of your third-party libraries all of a sudden because it might be hidden under anything. So this is something that does not really change on a meta view, but of course the things that you have to look out for always change. Then something that depends more on the company that you work for is your attack surface usually always grows. It rarely gets smaller. So you have to look out for everything that you add to your tech landscape also probably adds some level of attack surface to your company that you didn't have before. And over time for all companies, this also disperse more. So now you have a million vendors that you are having like cloud services from. You don't just buy something that it's running on your infrastructure, but you have a lot of stuff that is highly dependent and highly fluctuating in what kind of services you actually get. So this is something that I think is not going to stop anytime soon. And then what I actually did see evolve is that attacks went from the shop front, so to speak, from the web shop, etc., more into the backend and the infrastructure, because the hardening of shop fronts is progressing as well. So often companies just use ready bought systems, and these are actually hardened quite well. They're not your in-house built little thing. And so it makes much more sense to just target the backend, target whatever infrastructure your company employees, your own end users are working on, and not the web shop directly.
Yeah, it's amazing to see that shift as well. And it's so funny you mentioned you mentioned about the kind of the never-ending race between like, security teams trying to keep up with the rate of development and the new addition of assets all the time. It's something that we see every day when we work with our customers as well. Um, I'd like to ask you a little bit about, like, specifically for the retail and e-commerce industry, what are the most significant threats that you have seen at the moment?
So, as mentioned before, one of the biggest threats always is credential-based security issues. So, of course, you can prevent against some of it by rate limiting to keep your customers secure. But at the end of the day, if somebody else has a data breach and your customers or some of your customers have recycled their passwords and now their passwords are out in the open, you cannot really do anything against that. If it wasn't your data breach, what are you going to do? Um, Then something else that I noticed a lot is that you have data scattered across all different kinds of platforms. So the
Mhm.
idea that people have in mind is you have one huge customer data platform, and this is where all of the data goes in. And then, for example, if you delete an account, you just erase it from the database and then it's gone. But that's actually not how technology works anymore. So you have a lot of systems that contain the same data over and over again, or only chunks of the data. And so if you want to, for example, completely delete someone from your system, it's a lot of work, and there might still be traces of personal data somewhere in there. And also there might be some system where you didn't even think about it having the data in there. So you never really took the time to look at it, secure it, lock it down, etc. So this data scattering is really a big issue, I think. And connected to that, the lack of central overview of the platforms and solutions that you use, especially in startups or in companies that have a more startup-like feeling. You often have this thing that people are free to choose solutions when they want them, and then maybe do an informal request so they get the funding for it, and then add something new to the tech landscape, and suddenly you have 500 services that you're using, and you know about 300 of them, and
Hmm.
the other 200 are just out there as well, but you have them not monitored, or maybe you have them to some degree monitored, but there is a lot of things going on there that you don't necessarily know about in your own company.
Yeah, I think in retail and e-commerce especially, there's such an important focus on, making stuff usable and, for the customer experience to be great. But then our job in security is also to ensure that it is safe while it does all of those things as well. So yeah, ensuring that you get that balance correct is definitely part of that. You're doing a lot of proactively already, obviously by working with HackerOne and asking hackers to work on your platform. So, how can, I suppose, the proactive security measures prevent attacks from mal actors in the retail settings at the moment that you have?
So my first recommendation is that you build structured systems, because structure means that it's easier later to check in on it. So have a
Mhm.
security architecture instead of reactively just adding things to your landscape and having them be everywhere. So just limiting the number of services that you use is the biggest proactive step that you can take. And if there is also already a solution for a problem, often we have people asking for another solution because they like it better, or maybe they had it at their old job, etc. They prefer the user interface, but at some point you have to say, hey, we value you having a nice work environment, but we cannot have 5 solutions for the same problem and artificially grow our attack surface just because it has a nicer color. So just this structured approach, do an architectural approach instead of just putting things on top of everything. Then I like to say that best practices are best practices for a reason. Usually people didn't just make them up. So if you want to introduce a new security measure, if you want to introduce a new system, look up if there is any best practice around that. Or also if your developers ask you, like, should we go about this development in that way or that way, then look up, maybe there's a best practice for that, and try to add them right away and not retroactively weave them into the system, because especially if you're developing anything in-house, this is usually much more work than asking people to consult you right from the get-go. So just be proactive in talking to your development teams. Then learning from the mistakes from others is also a big one. Look out there if there are companies that openly talk about the issues that they had, openly talk about breaches that they had, and try to understand what went wrong there. Because some companies today do that. They very openly say, this is something that we did wrong. This is something where we made a mistake. These were the consequences. So look at that and see if this also applies to your systems. And then relating to the structured approach, the structure also makes another part easier, which is incident response, because we all like to pretend that we will never have a big incident, but most companies at some point have one. And then you want to be prepared because they don't announce themselves. They just suddenly, there is an incident. And at that point, you are happy if there is any structure to your tech landscape, if there is any procedure that you have put in place and that people have preferably already read through before the incident takes place. So try to make sure that everybody who is a stakeholder in that knows that an incident response is something that might be relevant at some point.
Yeah, I think that it's funny when you speak to people who are outside of security. I think that they want to look at it from a perspective of we don't want an incident, but like you said, it's inevitable that it could happen or it's likely to happen. So we need to have the correct structures in place to deal with that when it does
Exactly.
happen. Um, in terms of the hacking community and working with the hacking community, um, can you outline some of the benefits, but also then some of the challenges to working with a global community of hackers, such as the ones that are on the HackerOne platform?
Sure. So I think the biggest benefit is the vast amount of knowledge that you get when you engage with such a large community.
Hmm.
One of my principles in pen testing is that we go through different pen testing providers because in my experience, they often, like if you ask the same provider for a pen test, they go at it with the same approach. They have their ways of doing it always the same way. And then you ask another one and they might find some other stuff that the first pen test provider didn't look for, or maybe didn't look for as efficiently. And so you have this change of perspective a little. And if you have a bug bounty program with people from all over the world, with people from every country and every culture, they also go at it with different views, different ideas of how the systems behind it might work. So you get a lot more different views than if you just had a small community that you look for, just the pen tests that you order. So I think this is by far the biggest benefit that you get. Regarding challenges, you also might have the same cultural differences go against you. It's just like sometimes communication is a little can get a little confusing. And I don't think anybody involved is being malicious here or being stupid about it, but just sometimes people have expressions that I don't really understand, and retroactively I read it and I'm like, oh, that was clear what they meant, or probably the other way around. I try to word something 3 different times and then at the end it finally comes up. So yeah, it's but I would say it's a small challenge and it's something that you can grow into.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hopeful that we've launched this year, we've launched High as well. So hopefully using things like the AI feature on the platform can help with those sort of issues and communication. Overall, like you said, I think that everybody's there for the same goal, which is to try and protect the company. So let's see. Hopefully that develops over the next while too. Um, I'd like to understand a little bit more about you mentioned a lot of customer data earlier. So, what are the best practices that On has employed to protect its customers' data at the moment?
Yeah, so the at the very core of this for me is the principle of least privilege that should not
Mhm.
only apply to systems with customer data, but any system that holds any data, I guess. Which means people get only the privileges on a on a system that they actually need. Of course, you cannot just assign every little tiny privilege to everyone one by one, but consider that probably for most systems you need more than just users and administrators, but probably some more roles that are a bit more granular with respect to what people actually need from the system, and only assign it to somebody who has a business reason to use it. And on the other hand, in the name of not having the data scattered literally everywhere, use dummy data for testing and development. So there is usually no reason why your development team should ever have access to customer data, but they should have access to data that looks like customer data. sufficiently so that they can test edge cases on it too, but that does not represent any actual customers. So also, I can just recommend working together with your developer teams to get a source for such dummy data, because otherwise it's always easier for them to go for the customer data because it's already there. And sometimes they just don't understand why it's such a big problem, but you know that it's such a big problem. So just help them out there, be a bit proactive there as well, and try to get them a way to get dummy data easily. Then also, in relation to that complexity, try to handle the lowest possible number of systems that hold customer data. So limit the data scattering to what is absolutely necessary. And in the other direction, sometimes there is an opportunity to do some kind of, I would call it a reverse search, where when you see that some customer data has leaked somewhere, not necessarily from you, but maybe you find a leak where there are email addresses that are also in your database, then try to look for stuff that is also related to customer data you have. So of course, on the one hand, you cannot just look into the customer data yourself to find things to search for. But sometimes if you already have a hold, like, as I said, somebody approaches you and it's like, hey, I think my data was leaked, or you find a leak of something, then search if you can find more of that. Search if you can find more data leaks and find something that maybe is coming from you. Because the worst thing is that there is a huge data leak from your customer data out there and you never know about it.
Yeah, nightmare situation, really.
And then
We've got some great questions. Sorry,
sorry. And then
go ahead.
somebody tells you about it like a year later.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think yeah, it's definitely an important factor in everything that we do here as well. We've got some great questions coming in the chat, so we'll get to those in a minute. Please post your questions into the Q&A if you get a chance. I suppose the question I would have just following on would be, what is the advice that you'd give to like a security professional in a similar position to you to stay ahead of that kind of ever-evolving landscape? You mentioned a little bit about learning from similar companies earlier, so just interested in what else are you doing outside of that at the moment?
Sure. So the first thing that you can do that is pretty easy is talk to your security vendors. So if you have, like, for example, HackerOne, or you probably run a CM of some sorts, you probably run a vulnerability scanner. Talk to the vendors every now and then and ask them what they think, because they have a lot of other customers in a similar situation as you, and they try to be proactive. They try to keep their scanners and their CMs up to date, and they gather threat intelligence for you. So just pop them a question every now and then, what's going on. Then you should document systems and services as you that you use pretty well. So you can just if something comes up, then you can just be like, oh, we use that, or oh, we don't use that. I'm absolutely sure of that. And this is just in combination with the next thing. Stay in touch with the news on cybersecurity. There are various ways, various news outlets that specifically give you cybersecurity news on all levels of technical versus more, popular level kind of information. Find your best one and maybe put it to your newsfeed that you scroll through in the morning. And then if something like Log4j happens, then you're gonna know quickly. I don't know anything that is specifically tailored to retail companies, but also the general ones are going to give you a lot of useful information. Then the other thing that you can do is talk to hackers. And of course, you're doing that already if you're a customer of HackerOne.
Yeah.
But also try to keep somebody of your security team in touch with the hacker community. Usually there's a lot of options. There's conferences, there's conventions, etc. So if someone from your team asks if they can go to such a conference, enable them to do it. I know that some of these are quite expensive, but especially if it's in your area and you can maybe save on the long travel there, then it's absolutely worth it. So send people out to engage with the hacker community.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, like you said as well, it's funny how you mentioned that there's obviously retail specific stuff that is very, very important, but a lot of the stuff that's general is so interesting, like, that applies to everyone,
Yeah,
you know. Mm,
absolutely.
mm.
And
Um,
the last thing that I wanted to mention
oh, sorry.
is encourage your security team to talk to the developers, because often the security team doesn't know what the developers are working on, and the
Yeah.
developers are not that aware of the security context that they are working in. So just getting them to talk to each other often means that people identify things before they get critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, like some of the events that we've hosted in the past, I think generally the most interesting panels that we have on them are usually the hacker panels where we bring hackers into the room and we speak to them day to day. And like I think about how I feel lucky to have the privilege to be able to speak to people like this by working with HackerOne. I think that that's a really cool resource that definitely we should be leaning on a little bit more where possible. So Finn, thank you. Thank you for those answers and those questions. We have some questions in the chat though, so shall we dip into those if that works for you?
Yeah, absolutely. If we still have some time, let's go for it.
So we have a question coming in from Lee. It asks, I think there's from my understanding of speaking to you, there was HackerOne was already in place before you joined on, but were there any initial concerns that you were aware of about from the company about working with hackers? And then do you know how they were addressed? Or even if there is some concerns today, um, about working with a hacking community?
So initial concerns were a bit low, I think. So if you are facing a lot of concerns, I'm not sure I'm in the position to help you. Because our back then security lead was very much used to that, like bug bounty program, etc. And so he also made a great cause for it in front of the senior leadership team, why this is going to be useful for us, and this is an organized and structured bug bounty program and not just random group of hackers that are going to try to take down our systems, and they actually stick to the rules. So
Good.
our production is not going to go down because somebody tries a fancy new DOS attack on our web shop.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that like if you are in that situation where you have to convince someone, I think the most convincing part is that these are the hackers that are on your side. So you can give them rules that they should adhere to, but they are the ones that want to help you. And the ones that don't want to help you, that just want to attack your system, you're not going to hold them back by saying we're not doing a bug bounty problem. They're going to do their thing anyway. So just stay ahead of the curve with that. But I get that with a lot of senior leadership groups, this might be a hard sell in the beginning. Of course, you can always point to other companies who are already working with HackerOne, for example. Um, there was a second part to your question that I forgot.
Yeah, so the second part was how do you overdress and overcome those concerns with those leadership members? So if there's someone, I suppose it usually comes from people who aren't security based or security
Yes.
focused in terms of the concern. So have you had any resistance from non-security focused folks in your
We
place?
had, as far as I know, not a lot of it. I'm sure that there was some concerns because as soon as you say hackers, people are going to be concerned. So another
Yeah.
piece of advice is calling them security researchers instead. Of course, with a name like HackerOne on the company, it's not that easy to hide that. But if you just remove hacker from your vocabulary for the time where you want to sell that to senior leadership and call them security researchers, it makes things a lot easier, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I think we have a number of resources internally, but the one that I only reread it the other day, but it's our hacker powered security report. And I think that that outlines a lot of really interesting stuff about the community, but also about the industry trends that are happening as well. So really useful resource to share with any senior members if they don't fully get it
Mhm.
when you're trying to implement a bug bounty. We have another question here, if that's okay.
Yep.
So at the moment, how do you measure the ROI or the like return on the risk mitigated by HackerOne programs? So I think there's a lot in that, but basically, how do you measure the success of the program at the moment, Finn?
So, I mean, we are not on a management level, we are not currently technically measuring that. So we don't put a lot of numbers to it, but usually at the end of every half year, I make a quick summary of how many of the reports that we got actually were fixed, how many of them did upset people when we got them, because sometimes that happens, that we get something where people look at the report and are like, oh my God, how
Wow.
could we know about that? So did that happen during this half year? Did we get a lot of stuff that we actually wanted to fix? And of course, like we don't, to be honest, we don't get a huge ton of reports because we don't have that much internet facing surface outside of our web shop. But the thing is, for us, with the low amount of reports that we get, I usually recognize the ones where I know that this was something that ruffled some feathers. So I can take that into account when I'm trying to estimate if it's still worth it. And so far, it always has been. Just gauge the number of what is a good number for you of reports to get. And if you don't get that many, then of course you can try run a campaign of some sorts. But as long as you get a significant number of reports that you remember when you look at the title, then I think that's a good indicator that your bug bounty program is giving you some value.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely two ways of looking at it. I think that firstly, the community, it's important that you do engage them and incentivize it really. If you look at the report that I mentioned earlier, the thing that attracts hackers obviously the most is the bounties, but they are also curious individuals who are interested in learning more about, what's going on within other companies. So you have to engage the community where possible to get the results that you want. But also I think that anything that is found in a bug bounty, if you have the proper structures in place before that, then you've done a good job, or it's doing its job by getting it found there. Because if it gets through all of the other stuff that you're doing, then that's a good result, I think.
Yeah.
So there's another question here, if that's okay. It's come in from Jennifer. What are the top resources that you're using to keep on top of security news, and maybe not just in retail, but in general? And do you have any kind of like go-to areas for resources or news or anything that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so my favorite one, which is actually, it's a bit noisy if you want to call it that, is called Hacker News. It's from Y Combinator. So if you just Google Hacker News, you're going to find it. And it's noisy because, I mean, there's not that much content on security issues every day, all day, which is good. But it means it's usually just like a board of news that people from vaguely the hacking community find interesting right now. So the good thing is if you go there and most of the content is just about, like, I don't know, new discoveries about some kind of substance that people use to build buildings now or something like that, then it usually means there's not a lot of security relevant things going on in the world right now. But if there is a new thing that is making the rounds, you will definitely see it there on the front page. Then a bit more concise is Krebs on security. So Krebs, like the German word for a crab.
Oh, okay.
It's the last name of the guy who runs this blog, and it's very technically in depth occasionally. But I find it very interesting for precisely that reason, because if there is a new security fluke making the rounds, then he definitely has the competence to give you the details for it. There's also, if you want a more of a humorous spin, there is a Twitter or X account called Accidental CISO, which is from a guy who claims he has accidentally become the CISO of his company and now does some updates occasionally on what issues they are facing. So it's not a completely news-based thing, but it's something where a lot of things come up where you might think, oh, maybe that's worth looking into as well in our company.
Hmm. I really like that. That's a great name for for an account.
Yeah, that's the first things that come to my mind. Yeah. Oh, there's also Dark Reading, which is also a hacker run, well, news blog of sorts. So all of these are very much not focused on retail. They're very generic, and you will always get content there. But when these people are talking about all about the same thing, then you should be thinking about it as well.
Yeah, maybe check one or two if you get a bit of coverage on both, that you know that it's really important, and you should
Yeah.
probably pay some attention to it then. So we have another question in here. It says, I'm very new to the industry regarding pen testing specifically. So what was the best route to take? I suppose I presume to learn a little bit more about that. And maybe if you could share a little bit about your experience pen testing.
Sure. So, I mean, the first question is, if you are a novice, does that mean you are new to pen testing? Does this mean you're new to IT in general? Because if you have experience in one part of IT, usually it's a very good foundation to specialize first into this area to, like, for example, if you build network infrastructure or something like that, then you can try to find out what would be attacks on network infrastructure, because you will understand them more easily than something from a completely different area in security.
Mhm.
If you are completely new to all of this, there are some well, they're called war games. I find this term a little bit stupid, but it's what got through. So it's kind of like a game online that you can play, and it's somebody set up instances of websites or web services, etc., for you to hack. So it has a specific vulnerability. And depending on what war game you're looking at, it might be very easy or it might be really, really hard. And there might be some instructions there that lead you in the right direction, or there's absolutely nothing to go by, you're just on your own. So if you're completely new to everything, I would recommend looking at overthewire.org, which has a lot of war games, and the first ones are, yeah, they take you by the hand and get you to take your first look at a Linux system, for example.
Yeah.
Connect to your first SSH server, etc. So it starts very, very basic and then slowly ramps up, and then later you can take your pick at what kind of flavor of security you want to look at most. I think web security is a favorite one. So try to look for web security war games, or there are also other websites that have like more of a guided approach. What is there? There's something like, I forgot the name.
It's
There's
okay.
something
We can have a
HackerOne
look
or something like that. So if you look for that, you're going to find websites where you can sign up, and for like a little bit of money, you're going to get new funny challenges every week or every month. And after a while, they also provide write-ups. So if you didn't understand it and didn't get through it, you can later read the write-up and try to understand what was going on there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for sharing those. I think there's some great stuff for whoever asked that question to get going on. And yeah, if you need anything else, then feel free to reach out to any of the HackerOne team or whatever. We're happy to share whatever in regard to the community as well. If you want to check out the community page, there's some really good content on there as well. I think it's Hacker 101 is the name of our community page. So there's a question in here from Jim. Jim, thank you for asking your question. It says, can you address some of the concerns with with wireless/smartphone connectivity, providing an easy backdoor into employee communications and information then being broadcast? I think there's a lot in that, but if you have you had any experience with that or seen anything in that regard?
So not a lot that I can go by here, because it's also not my strong forward here. I mean, the usual route to go about this is you can capture a lot of it if you try to tunnel most communication with your own infrastructure through some kind of VPN, and have a dedicated guest network at your own location. So guests don't have to use your usual Wi-Fi, which means that you can secure your usual Wi-Fi a lot more than just slapping a password on it. But other than that, I'm sure that there is more in-depth recommendations that people could give you, but it's not my specialty. So
Okay.
sorry.
We'll try and find some content on that and get something up at some point, Jim. I'll ask the marketing team to look into some sort of a blog or something around that area if possible, and that we can do in the future. And there's one final question here, I think, from Siddhartha. At the moment, it's the final question. If anybody has one now, please get one into the chat, and we're happy to run for a little bit further. But it says, "Hi, thanks for the session. May I ask how I suppose a security company ensure that their own researchers or probably their own employees don't bleed their own company? So I presume, how do you ensure that your own employees aren't then working on your own bounty program? If that's the question."
I mean, if that is the question, I have to admit that, of course, if somebody just went on HackerOne with their name and handed something into our bug bounty program and maybe their onrunning.com email address, I would be a bit, I would raise my eyebrows. But at the end of the day, somebody could be hiding behind every kind of username, so we wouldn't know, so to speak. You can encourage the opposite by being like, the easiest route is to hand in something internally, and then you get maybe not the same scale of bug bounty as you would get officially, but for example, you get free. I mean, if you're working in a retail environment, free company goodies or something like that. But at the end of the day, a surefire way, I think I cannot tell you a surefire way to do that.
Yeah. Like you could, I suppose, try and run your own an internal bug bounty program, like you said. But yeah, like if you're in a private state as a bug bounty program, then it's kind of like we've so many researchers on the platform that it's unlikely that one of your own employees will get invited. And then if they did, they've probably manually invited themselves into the program, and therefore that's your first immediate red flag. If you're public, then it's kind of a hard thing to police, but I'm presume that you will know because there's quite a lot of insider information that will be used if someone is doing that. So
Yeah.
I think for the moment that is all of the questions that we have so far. But I think if we close it off there, unless Finn, do you have any closing remarks or anything else that you wanted to add? Anything that's left unsaid from today?
Anything that is left unsaid, that's a very open question. I don't think so. I mean, all I can say is if you take anything away from this session today, I would say it should be that you should be proactive, that you should work with the future in mind, so try to stay ahead of the curve and try to improve your incident response, try to improve the structure of your company before you are in need of it, because then it's too late. And if you have not been yet hit by some kind of major incident, fingers crossed it stays that way, but be prepared for it to happen, because to most companies it does happen at some point sooner or later. So keep that in mind, keep your incident response capable, and most of all, if you have backups, try them every now and then. Otherwise, the best backup is worthless if you cannot apply it.
Yes, please, everybody try your backups because that's the one time they don't work is the one time you'll need them. So look, Finn, I really appreciate your time today, and I really appreciate everybody joining us for the webinar. There will be a copy of the recording, so if you've missed anything, we'll send it out afterwards, but also it'll be available on demand. So please share internally with any of your colleagues who are interested in learning more about HackerOne. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of the customer account team, or log some requests on our website, and we'll be sure to reach out to you directly. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.